Runners. They are the first and most human-looking stage of the cordyceps brain infection in The Last of Us. They've been infected anywhere from a few hours to roughly 2 days, so the fungus hasn't yet broken through their skin or skull. You'll still see recognizable faces, torn clothing, and bloodshot eyes, rather than the hardened fungal plates that come later. And this freshness makes them eerily familiar. They scream, they cry, and sometimes mute remnants of their former lives. And because their muscles and nervous system remains largely intact, runners are fast, agile, and violently unpredictable. They charge headlong at noise, swing wildly, and can swarm in packs that overwhelm even well-armed survivors. They rely on normal human senses like sight, sound, and limited reasoning, so stealth and distraction tools like bottles, bricks, and suppressed weapons are vital. A single runner is manageable, but their speed means one alert scream can draw an entire room's worth of infected before you have time to reload. And gameplay-wise, they're the foot soldiers of any infected encounter, creating constant tension between going loud and staying silent. Stalkers. They occupy the unsettling middle ground between freshly infected runners and fully transformed clickers. Usually 2 days to about a year post-infection, the cordyceps fungus has begun to rupture their skin and skull, forming ragged plates that jut from cheeks, neck, and shoulders. And their faces are often half-masked by budding mycelium, leaving one eye or sometimes none visible, which gives them a distorted, patchwork appearance that's both human and alien. You can still hear breathless snarls and the occasional terrified whimper. They're still mobile and reactive enough to show vestiges of a human survival instinct. Yet the fungus is clearly winning, turning that instinct into something predatory. And what makes stalkers uniquely dangerous is their predatory cunning. Unlike the straight-line charge of runners, stalkers hide in shadows, cling to walls, and scuttle along ceilings, waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. They'll peek around corners, retreat when wounded, then flank from another angle, creating a cat-and-mouse rhythm that keeps players off balance. In gameplay, they're harder to track with listen mode, so clearing the room becomes a tense exercise in watching every vent, doorway, and dripping corridor for sudden movement. Clickers. They are the third and most iconic stage of the cordyceps brain infection, typically reached a year or more after exposure. By this point, the fungus has burst completely through the skin, splitting the cranium into a grotesque bloom of classified plates and orange-white mycelium that replaces the eyes and much of the face. And because the infection has severed the optic nerves, clickers are totally blind, and what remains of their humanity is buried beneath a hardened fungal carapace that doubles as natural armor, making small caliber rounds or melee attacks largely ineffective unless perfectly placed. Stripped of sight, clickers navigate with an eerie form of echolocation. They emit rapid staccato clicks that bounce off walls and objects, letting them map their surroundings in a sonar-like mental image. And when those clicks lock onto a survivor's position, they unleash sudden, frenetic bursts of speed, swinging clawed arms with lethal force. One grab is always an instant kill, and using sound-distracting items like bottles, bricks are often safer than open combat, and a well-timed shiv to the neck or a high-powered firearm can drop a clicker. Bloaters. They represent the end stage of the cordyceps brain infection. Survivors who've endured the fungus for several years until it has fused with muscle and bone to create a hulking, armor-plated monstrosity. Layers of hardened mycelium form a natural exoskeleton that's peppered with pustules full of infection spores, giving bloaters a lumpy, coral reef appearance. And their bodies are so overgrown that clothing and skin are barely visible. Even their jaws are pried open by fungal plates, exposing rows of decaying teeth and a perpetual wheeze that sounds half animal, half asthmatic. And this living tank shrugs off handgun rounds and most melee strikes. The only reliable ways to pierce the armor are sustained gunfire from high-caliber weapons like explosives or fire or shotguns, which scorches the fungus enough to expose vulnerable tissue. And despite their bulk, bloaters are anything but lumbering targets. They can rip chunks of mycelium-coated flesh from their own bodies and then hurl them like grenades. And these sacks burst on impact, releasing a cloud of corrosive spores that both damage and disorient anyone caught inside. Up close, they charge with surprising speed, swiping wide arcs capable of instant kills or lifting victims off the ground before tearing them apart. And their thick armor means they rarely flinch, so every missed shot buys them more time to close distance. Players must juggle spacing, crowd control, and scarce resources to bring a bloater down before it turns a tense encounter into a death sentence. And bloaters gives a glimpse of what happens when the infection isn't just a quick death, but a slow metamorphosis into something almost indestructible. Shamblers. Bloaters develop after years in relatively dry conditions, and Shamblers seem to arise when infected bodies spend long stretches in damp, poorly ventilated environments like sewers, flooded basements, and rain-soaked Pacific Northwest buildings. And the constant moisture lets the fungus grow outward in bulbous, fluid-filled sacs that cover the torso and arms. And their faces are entirely covered in mycelium, so like clickers and bloaters, they're blind, guided instead by echolocative groans and the vibrations of nearby movements. And in combat, Shamblers act as living chemical weapons. They lumber toward targets with surprising bursts of speed, then unleash a pressurized blast of acidic spores that scorch skin and rapidly drain health. And the cloud lingers, forcing players to reposition or choke on corrosive vapor. And when a Shambler finally drops, it detonates in a larger, toxic burst that can finish off careless survivors or other infected caught in the radius, and their fungal armor shrugs off small caliber rounds. So fire, explosive, unsustained shotgun or rifle fire are the safest ways to breach the pustules before they close the gap. And encounters often combine Shamblers with runners or stalkers, creating layered threats where you must juggle crowd control while avoiding the spreading acid mist. Rat King. He is one-of-a-kind monstrosity that Abby encounters deep in the bowels of Seattle's Ground Zero Hospital in The Last of Us Part 2. Hidden for more than 2 decades in a sealed quarantine wing, humid, dark, and packed with corpses, the Cordyceps fungus was free to grow unchecked, knitting together multiple long-term hosts into a single, colossal mass. And the result is a grotesque amalgam of bloater-thick armor, clicker skulls, and stalker limbs fused into a hulking body that lurches through holes like living demolition equipment. Its surface is a tangle of hardened plates and pulsing sacs, while mouths and torsos protrude at impossible angles, all shrieking in dissonant chorus. Gameplay-wise, the Rat King is the series' ultimate stress test. It charges with the brute force of a bloater, but it checks doors of hinges and hurls Abby across rooms if it closes the distance. And mid-fight, portions of its fused body can tear free, most notably a stalker-like offshoot that peels away to harass from flanks, forcing the player to battle on 2 fronts.